So I'm Daryl Davidson, and I'd like to say thanks to SafeCare for the great introduction. We're happy to be here to talk to you about the preliminary rates for 2024. As Kaval had mentioned, Kieran Body will be co-presenting, so she's actually going to be starting us off shortly. And we will be joined as well, probably not on camera right away, by Jerry Paquette. He is a senior manager of insurance and underwriting, and he will just be available as a resource as needed. Yeah, okay. So just to let you know, during the presentation, I don't know if I can actually do it right now. I was going to go off camera, but maybe I'll just stay on camera. Okay, let's just go ahead and get started. So I'm going to hand it over to Kieran to discuss rate setting and healthcare rates.
I'm on mute. Thank you, Daryl. So good morning, everyone. As Daryl said, my name is Kieran Batty, and I will be discussing your industry insurance rates for the upcoming 2024 year. Next slide, please, Daryl. Next slide.
Do you have the right slide yet?
No, next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so before we dip into information specifically related to your industry, let us look at global information that our CFO shared at this summer's town hall session to explain the overall insurance rate remaining at 1.55. This slide speaks to investment returns. Though we took a loss in 2022, our performance was better than any other jurisdiction, and therefore our financial position remains healthy and allows us to continue to offset the overall insurance rates for the system. More on this on the next slide. Again, just to be completely clear, the figures that are mentioned, previous slide. The figures that are mentioned here are pertaining to the overall system and not just to your industry. Next slide, please. So for this slide, we're still referring to the average base rate for all of the industries combined. So if you look at the green line, which is the average base rate line, it has been consistently below the blue average cost rate line since 2007. This indicates that the favorable investment returns have discounted rates below the cost to the system since 2007. The red line at the bottom represents the administration costs, and those have remained flat and have been decreasing over the last couple of years. So if an individual industry's insurance is increasing, this should assure you that it is not because of WorkSafe BC's administrative overheads. Next slide, please. So this slide shows WorkSafe BC's classification and rate setting structure. So we take a look at BC's economy, and then we divide the economy into sectors. The sectors are then divided into subsectors, and then subsectors into classification units. And then firms are usually placed with peers and competitors into a classification unit that form an industry group. And then industry groups, if they're large enough, they remain their own industry groups. And if they are not large enough, they are placed with other industry groups of similar costs into rate group bands. If when industry groups start having higher or lower costs, they're moved to more appropriate rate groups. Next slide, please. So WorkSafe BC represents the entirety of BC economy across 7 large industrial sectors, such as primary resources, manufacture, service sector, and then 24 subsectors, such as tourism, business, healthcare. Out of our roughly 500 industry classification units, SafeCare Community is represented in the service sector. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the classification unit description for the two of the classification units that we are discussing here as part of the SafeCare community, long-term care and community health support services. This information is also available on worksafebc.com, so you can download the classification unit description of either of these two classification units for your reference. Next slide, please. This slide paints a picture of the WorkSafeBC's rate group structure. So the starting point is an industry's classification unit, which is shown as the golden block on the bottom of the image. Firms are placed together with peers and competitors into those industry classification unit. Most industries, though, are not large enough for us to calculate insurance rates. So they are gathered into one of our 235 industry groups. 35 industry groups that are large enough to become independent rate groups are their own rate groups, and the rest are placed into a rate group band that matches their claim cost. And the scale on the right-hand side of this slide shows you the range for each of the 20 bands. So together, the 35 industry-specific rate groups and the 20 rate group bands represent the 55 rate groups used to set base rates. And that would be it if nothing changed ever. But however, all of the industries evolve over time and not at the same pace or in the same way. So each year, we review the industry groups in each rate group to make sure that they continue to share similar claim costs. Those with higher costs move to higher risk rate group bands with higher insurance rates. And this ensures that industry base rates are commensurate with their risk and over time cover their costs to the system. Higher industry rates also help employers become more aware of the cost of injuries in their industry and prompt interest around how those injuries can be prevented. And of course, industry groups with lower costs are moved to lower risk rate groups with lower insurance rates. Next slide, please. So here we can see that both long-term care and community health support services form their own rate groups, rate group AO and FE respectively. So this ensures that there's no industrial cross-subsidization happening in these two rate groups, as the only members of these rate groups are the members of these CUs specifically. Next slide, please. So now looking towards the rates for long-term care classification unit 766011, we can see that the rate has been on steady increase since 2020. Prior to 2022, surplus kept the charge rate below cost rate, but okay, so next slide, please. So this slide details the components which make up the base rate for an industry. The left side are the components that make up the total cost rate. This is percentage of assessable payroll WorkSafeBC must collect to cover the anticipated cost of the new claims that are incurred by the rate group in a given year and the future cost of administering those claims. That brings us to the right side, which starts with the total cost rate and then adjusts for funding of deficit or return of surplus, plus contribution to provide for any necessary reserves. And this is generally amortized over 5 years. The funding policy adjustment, it's not applicable here. So the higher, but it is normally when we use to limit the base rate changes from year to year. WorkSafeBC generally limits a change of maximum 20% to deliver more stable rates. So if your rate is changing, the most it will change is by 20%, either increase or decrease. In this case, higher claim costs are the primary reason for the increased rates. It is dampened somewhat by a greater experience rating credit and a lower deficit. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the cost rate and the charge rate for community health support services, CU. the community health support services industry has experienced rate increase for past several years. Again, prior to 2023, surplus money kept the charge rate below the cost rate. Next slide, please. The industry's cost rate has increased, and as has the deficit. WorkSafe BC has limited rate increase to 20% for the year 2024, and a further increase can be expected for 2025. Next slide, please. Now, let's talk a little bit about WorkSafe BC's experience rating program. And industry's insurance rate, which we just spoke about, is just the starting point for the premium each company or each individual firm or business pays. WorkSafe BC's experience rating program examines the claim cost performance of each firm and awards as much as 50% discount off of the base rate, or applies up to 100% surcharge over time. Experience rating looks at several factors, such as claim costs in relation to the size of the firm's workforce or payroll to get a ratio. We then compare your firm's cost to payroll ratio to that of your rate group, and the rate group is the level at which we calculate insurance rate. If a firm has a ratio less than its rate group and is performing better than average, it will move towards a discount. And if a firm has a ratio higher than its rate group, it is performing worse and will move towards surcharge. Next slide, please. So some of the things that are factored into claim cost and experience rating is no fault. All claims are used unless explicitly excluded. Excluded claims are occupational diseases, typically with long latency periods. COVID claims have been excluded from experience rating calculations. And for fatal costs, we use a 5-year rolling average of all claim costs. Next slide, please. So this slide shows an example. So if we take a look at a $5,000 employer with an average performance in an industry with the base rate of 4%, would pay $20,000, but also could pay as little as $10,000 or as much as $40,000, depending on their safety record over time. So with this, I will pass it on to Gerald to speak about time loss claims.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and go on camera for a second here. So with the next several slides, we're going to be exploring what's driving the time loss claims within the 2 primary CUs that SafeCare BC members fall under. So 766006, Community Health Support Services, and 766011, Long-Term Care. So the first graph you see here speaks to time loss claim injury rates by CU over the past 5 years, 2018 to 2022. We've also graphed, in addition to the CU-specific time loss claim injury trends, the trend lines for SafeCare BC members. So the black dotted line that you see here represents the BC average time loss claim injury rate for all CUs. The orange line represents all BC employers in community health support services. So again, CU 766006. And you'll note that in 2018, the average time loss claim injury rate was 3.8, and in 2022, it was 6.2. So the blue line that you'll see here represents SafeCare BC employers specifically in community health support services. So in 2018, the time loss claim injury rate was 4.4, and in 2022, it was 4.3. Now, the green line that you'll see here right close to the red line there That represents all BC employers in long-term care, so CU 766011. So in 2018, the rate was 8.0. In 2022, it jumped up to 17.1. So this is an over seven times increase in the BC average, or from the BC average. The red line represents SafeCare BC employers in long-term care, so in the same CU 766011. In 2018, the rate was 7.6. In 2022, it was 17.7. This is almost 7.5 times the BC average. Okay, so this slide shows the complete duration of time loss claims by CU for the same 5-year period that we were talking about, 2018 to 2022. So the average complete duration is the average claims duration in days. And this is just one of the metrics that can show what's driving the costs. The longer the claim, the more expensive the claim tends to be. So as with the graph in the previous slide, we've also graphed the trend lines for SafeCare PC members as well. So you'll see that the black dotted line again, that represents the BC average complete duration of claims for all CUs. The orange line represents all BC employers in community health support services. You'll note that the average complete duration of claims in this CU in 2022 was 69 days. The blue line you'll see there represents SafeCare BC employers in community health support services. So that's just the members that are captured in this line. And in 2022, the average complete duration of claims in this CU was 73 days. The green line that you'll see there represents all BC employers in long-term care. And then the red line represents SafeCare BC employers in long-term care. So workdays lost is another metric we can use to measure the impact. Just give me a second. I lost my notes here. I think I went to a different line. Sorry about that, guys. Tech difficulty here. So let's go back to that. Workdays lost is another metric we can use to measure the impact of time loss claim injuries in these two CUs. In long-term care, the total workdays lost in 2022 was 210,914, which is equivalent to 844 full-time workers missing from the sector. So that's assuming a 250 workdays in a year. In community health support services, the total workdays lost in 2022 was 104,842, which is equivalent to 419 full-time workers missing from the sector, assuming again that's 250 workdays in a year. So this underscores what we already know, that preventing injuries and having effective return to work programs is important and can have that positive impact on industries such as healthcare that are facing significant human resource shortages. Okay, this slide shows that the cost of time loss claims in these two CUs is in the tens of millions of dollars. So let's take a look at the different lines. So the green line here represents all BC employers in long-term care, so 766,011. The time loss claim injury rate for this CU was over 28 million in 2018, and now in 2022 it was almost 48 million. So that is a 71% increase in 5 years. The red line represents SafeCare BC employers in long-term care. In 2018, the time loss claim injury cost for this CU was just over 19 million, and in 2022, it was almost 30 million. So that's a 58% increase in that same 5-year period. So the orange line here represents all BC employers in community health support services. And in 2018, the time loss claim injury cost for this CU was almost 9.75 million. And in 2022, it was almost 29 million. That's a 197% increase in just 5 years. So the blue line here represents SafeCare BC employers in community health support services. In 2018, the time loss claim injury cost for this CU was over 4.7 million, and in 2022, it was over 6.5 million. That's about a 40% increase in that same 5-year period. Okay, so the next 3 slides speak to the top 5 accident types and proportion of time loss claim counts by occupation from 2018 to 2022 within the community care CU. So as you can see within CU 766006, in that 5-year period, the time loss claim counts, the highest or the accident type with the highest proportion of the claim costs or claim counts was overexertion with 36%. You'll see that next in line was falls on the same level at 14%. Exposure to toxic substances was 10%. So exposure to toxic substances also includes the COVID claims. So not all of those claims were COVID, but it does include those claims. Acts of violence was next with 8%, and oh, sorry, I think that I didn't move the slide forward. I apologize. Okay, let's go back just a little bit here. I do have some additional notes, and I do apologize for that, guys. So I just wanted to note that the psychological injury or mental disorder time loss claims for this CU from 2018 to 2022 made up 96.7% of the time loss claims costs captured in the other accidents type. That is the time loss claim cost chart that you see here. But you'll also note that in terms of costs, it only represented 10%. Sorry, yeah, represented 10%. So it's not a huge amount there. Okay. So when we look at nature of injury, which identifies the principal physical characteristics of the injury or illness, mental disorder claims make up 21.8% of the time loss claim costs for this CU. So I do apologize, Guy, I kind of messed you up a little bit on that, that slide here. So this chart identifies the time loss claim counts, and this chart over here on the right identifies the time loss claim costs. Okay, so this pie graph on this slide speaks to the proportion of time loss claim counts by occupation in community health support services for the past 5 years. And you'll see that the nurse aides, orderlies, and patient services associate group, which is the same occupation type that healthcare assistants are in, accounts for 64% of the time loss claims for that 5-year period. Okay, so now let's take a look at long-term care. So CU 766011, and the next 3 slides will speak the same as we did in the slide before. They'll speak to the top 5 accident types and proportion of time loss claim counts by occupation from 2017 to 2021 within that CU. So these 2 charts show the top 5 time loss claims by count and by costs in long-term care for that same period. While the exposure to toxic substances accident type, which includes COVID claims, accounted for 25% of the time loss claims in long-term care by count, it only accounted for about 7% of the time loss claim counts from 2018 to 2022. It would be useful to note that overexertion, acts of violence, and falls on the same level were the 3 accident types with the highest proportion of time loss claim costs in long-term care. As identified a few slides back, it is claim costs that drive the rates. Okay, so the pie graph on this slide speaks to the proportion of time loss claim counts by occupation in long-term care for the 5 years, 2018 to 2022. And you'll see again that nurse aides, orderlies, and patient service associates accounts for 65% of the time loss claims for this time period. So that's our healthcare assistants that are found within that group. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about psychological injury claims. The next two slides speak to psychological injury claims, which have seen an increase within the healthcare industry over the last few years. So every spring, WorkSafe BC publishes an update to its media backgrounder on psychological injury or mental disorder claims. 5 years of data is provided this year, including breakdowns by industry and by occupation. So this represents, this presentation differs from information previously reported in the mental disorder claims media backgrounder you would have seen last year or in previous years. In the previous reporting, the mental disorder claims included psychological injury-owned claims and claims with both a physical and psychological injury. Psychological injury-only claims and claims with both a physical and psychological injury will now be reported separately. So you'll see them on different tables, different graphs within that media backgrounder. Psychological injury only claims is now being used to describe claims that arise from a traumatic event or stressor in the workplace. So SafeCare BC will make a PDF copy of this presentation available to you guys, and you can visit this and other links that are provided throughout the presentation. So you will get a link to this backgrounder as well. Okay, so here you'll see that the 5-year summary by industry subsector of psychological injury only claims reported and claims allowed by year for the years 2018 to 2022. Not all claims registered receive an allow or disallow decision. Some claims are suspended and do not proceed through the decision-making process. So this happens after claims are registered and is often a choice workers make not to proceed with the requirements of the claims injury process, including obtaining a diagnosis from a psychologist or psychiatrist. So suspended claims may proceed at a future point, and receive an allow or disallow decision at that time. It won't be any surprise to you to see that the healthcare and social services sector has the highest proportion of psychological injury only claims reported and accepted by all industry sectors in 2022, approximately 50% of the total reported claims in 2022. Okay, so this slide shows the 5-year summary of psychological injury only claims by occupation for that same 5-year period. So you'll see here that of the claims reported, 874 of them were of the nurse category, 315 is paramedics. You'll see social and community service workers at 508, and you'll see that those numbers cascading down, and the same with the psychological injury only claims first allowed in the year. So these are the allowed claims. Okay, in this table, you'll see the 5-year summary by industry subsector of physical with psychological injury claims accepted by year for the years 2018, 2022. And if you remember back, I mentioned that these two types of psychological injury claims are being reported separately. So here's where you'll see where long-term care and community health support services fall within that first accepted in the 5-year summary. Okay, so the following 4 slides speak to where you can access more information and resources to support preventing injuries to workers in your workplaces. So a lot of the data we've been speaking to you, as well as additional data you may want, is available for you to explore in greater detail on our shared data interactive tools page on worksafebc.com. So if you just go on to our website and then type in shared data interactive tools. You can actually also do that from your Google taskbar. Just type in shared data interactive tools WorkSafe BC, and it's going to take you to a link that will take you directly to where you can access that. And if you do ever have any questions on how to access that, SafeCare BC is well versed in how to access that information. So they'll be able to point you towards that as well. So you're able to see healthcare industry and CU specific data under the industry health and safety data tab on this page. And you're also able to see time loss claim data specific to healthcare assistance in BC under the data at a glance tab on this page. Don't worry about trying to remember that. Again, if you struggle with that, SafeCare will be able to direct you. And this is also another way you can access your employer health and safety planning toolkit that we will discuss in the next slide. Okay, so available through your online account on worksafebc.com, we have a great interactive tool that does give you an overview of your company's health and safety performance. And the Employer Health and Safety Toolkit is what that's called. And it gives you easy access to your company's data. So you don't see any other firm's data, only yours, to see the injuries and claims that drive your specific costs for your organization. It has various drill down features to enable you to take action. It also shows how improving your health and safety performance will impact your assessment rates. You can also compare yourself to your peers, and that will allow you then, that link will allow you to take a look at how you do compared to other employers within the same industry. Okay, video overviews of this great application are available on worksafebc.com. So it'll show you how to navigate through and find the information you're looking for. And you can sign up to use it through your online account and get access to your data. It is targeted to larger employers with 5 claims or more per calendar year. So not as applicable to the very small employers that may only have, maybe 1 claim or no claims in a year on average, where the number of employees might be quite a bit smaller. So more targeted to those larger employers. Okay, WorkSafe BC also provides a lot of prevention and return to work resources, tools and applications to support employers in preventing injuries and reducing claim costs in their workplaces. These include videos, books, bulletins, and info sheets. And I'll point you directly at some of the great bulletin and info sheets that we have related to safe patient handling. You'll find all of those under our safe patient handling or safe patient handling page on worksafebc.com on our website. Okay, so we saw in data covered earlier in the earlier slides that MSIs or your those injuries where you've got overexertion type injuries, they account for the highest percentage of time loss claims for healthcare percentages or assistance across the province. To support employers and workers within the healthcare industry with prevention of MSIs in their workplace, we have, like I mentioned, several resources that you can access. If you visit I already mentioned that if you visit the patient handling page, you'll find those. Okay, so WorkSafe BC works closely with a number of health and safety associations, or what we call HSAs, as you will see on this slide, including SafeCare BC. So SafeCare has a number of tailored resources to support MSI prevention and other department-specific topics. So if you haven't seen their website, I would definitely advise you to go take a look at it. It's got some great resources. Okay, so we've given you a lot of information throughout the presentation, and now we have some time for your questions. I'll turn it back over to SafeCare.
Thank you so much, Daryl. There was actually a couple of questions that came in, so I could just field those for you now. The first question was, question 1, if investments have continued to yield a good return, why did the cost rate increase in 2022 over the charge rate? And says, with great interest rates on investments now, do we expect to see some relief in the coming years?
So Kieran, I'm going to turn that one over to you if you're okay with that.
Yeah, so the first question, I can take that. So when we spoke about the investment returns, it was an investment returns offsetting a rate that was for the system as a whole. So Daryl, I'm not sure if you're still sharing the slide deck, but if you could go back to the second slide in my presentation.
Yeah, let me just go back then. Sorry, probably easier this with the way I've got it set up. Okay, so that would be
This
right there.
one, yeah, the next one. The
Oh,
next
the
one.
next one.
Yeah. So as you can see here, the total cost rate line is the blue line. This is for the overall system, and I think I mentioned it on, I might have forgotten to mention it on this slide. I think I did, but not sure. So the blue is the overall cost rate line for the whole system, and the green is the base rate line for the whole system. And as we can see, since 2007, the base rates have been lower than the total cost rates. And this is, of course, for the whole system. So the overall rate has been offset by good investment returns since 2007. In terms of specific rates for like a rate group or a classification unit, it depends if that classification unit has a deficit or surplus. And that's where we spoke about the amortization adjustment. So if your rate group is in a surplus, you would have an amortization adjustment that would offset your rate a little bit. And if you have a deficit, then you would have an amortization adjustment that would add a little bit to your industry's base rate. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Thank you. And there's a second part to the question. It was, can you please define no fault claims?
Jerry, are you available to take question 2? Are you able to unmute yourself?
Can people hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Actually, if I could speak a little bit further, elaborate on what you were saying on that first question, Kieran. Daryl, if you're able to go back to slides 12 and slides 14 of the slide deck. So here on slide 12, what we're looking at is the reality of what got built into the insurance rate for long-term care. And as Kieran was mentioning, while the system as a whole has a significant surplus, when it comes to delivering insurance rates to each industry, what we do is, in a sense, keep 50 different bank accounts for each of the different rate groups. Long-term care is an industry large enough to be its own rate group AO. And so on the right-hand side image, below the preliminary 2024 insurance rate and the 2023 insurance rate, you see a line item there called the amortization adjustment. Really, all that's talking about is whether or not that particular industry is in a surplus or a deficit position. And how is it that a given industry might be in a surplus or a deficit different than other industries? It all comes down to their own claims performance and the type of insurance rates that have been charged to industries in the past. So when we're looking at long-term care, what we were seeing was that for the year 2023, we had forecasted a deficit, meaning that there weren't sufficient funds in your bank account to pay all of the future bills on the claims that are occurring. So we needed to add 0.26% to the insurance rate. That deficit has gotten reduced a little bit down to 0.22 cents for the year 2024. Now, even though the rate group is in a deficit, its deficit would actually be larger if it didn't participate in the overall excess investment returns that it does share with all industries. So what Kieran was mentioning about offsetting the insurance rates for the system as a whole does actually still apply to rate group AO. In fact, the insurance rates would be higher because your deficit would have been higher had it not been for those investment returns. If you go 2 slides forward, Daryl, we can actually see the same issue at play for the community health support industry as well. For the year 2024, what we're seeing is that amortization adjustment is $1, meaning that this particular industry and its rate group, because it is large enough to be its own rate group, also doesn't have enough funds to cover all future bills. And that's why that amortization adjustment is $1. It would be much more than 1% if it wasn't for the overall surplus monies that it is participating in. So while the charged rate is higher than the cost rate for each of the CUs, it's because of the deficit position of each of those 2 rate groups and 2 industries. So that was the a more elaborate answer to that first question. And sorry, could we repeat the second question?
Yep, sure. The second question was, can you please define a no-fault claim?
Yeah, paper cut. So any WorkSafe, this insurance model that we have at WorkSafe BC is based on the premise of when an injury occurs, it in or related to business activity in and around the work that's happening in a workplace, it's deemed to be an acceptable claim. We don't go about determining whether the worker was at fault for the injury occurring or whether the employer was at fault for the injury occurring. That's not part of the adjudication process. What we simply acknowledge and adjudicate around is whether or not that unfortunate event occurred in or around work activity that a worker was engaged in. And so that's the basic notion of no fault.
Thank you. And the third question that came in was, if time loss is down in the CU over the past 3 years, do we expect to see further relief in the coming years on the base rates?
So there's actually a couple of factors that build into the insurance rates. So from 2 really broad perspectives, what drive the overall costs? One is the frequency of injuries, and then the second is how long it is taking for a given injury worker to be returned back into the workplace. So the frequency drives the number of claims. The severity or complexity drives the duration, the length of time of a given claim. So obviously, if there's many more claims, then that would be an upward pressure on costs. If claims are more complex or it's taking longer for injured workers to get back into the workplace, well, that's also driving up costs. So to answer the question, yes, if in a given industry, we are seeing that the injury rate, the frequency of injuries, the number of claims are going down, A reasonable expectation would be, everything else being equal, yes, that we would anticipate a lowering of insurance rates going forward. The reality is almost nothing is ever always equal. So we do need to take a look on the other side of the equation in terms of the duration of the claims and see, is that going in the direction we want it to be going, or is it getting longer? If duration is getting longer, then even if the volume of claims is going down, we could still see an upward trend on the insurance rates.
Okay, and the last question that just came in is, can you explain what the funding policy adjustment is referring to?
Absolutely. That's where we go about not charging you more than 20% of the insurance rate. So what you see in the bottom right-hand corner of that image, base rate for the year 2023 is $2.89. That's the insurance rate that we're charging to the industry for 2023. For the year 2024, starting at the top of the column, we see that the total cost rate, so just the costs of the claims and managing those claims, amounts to $3.38. We also have a deficit that we need to accommodate for. That pushes the entire insurance rate to $4.38 per $100 of payroll, or 4.38%. Well, 4.38% is a significant hike over the insurance rate of 2.89 in 2023. We limit the insurance rate increase to 20%, and that's why there's that funding policy adjustment of minus 1.01. All told, what that then indicates, as Kieran mentioned on this particular slide, if in the year 2024, we know that the full insurance rate is north of 4%, and we're charging less than 3.5%, you can expect that there will be a further increase to the insurance rate for the year 2025.